Hello everyone, welcome back to another book review. Today we are kicking off the year 2022, and the first book that I read in 2022 is Japan AI, A Tall Girl's Adventure in Japan by Aimee Major Steinberger. Now this book called to me off the shelf mostly because of the subtitle, A Tall Girl's Adventure in Japan. So Japan is known for trending a little shorter in height. I looked up the Wikipedia page for average height. It wasn't actually that far off. I guess in the United States, which is where I live, men are about 5'9" and women about 5'3". And in Japan, men were about 5'7" and women about 5'2". However, Aimee Major Steinberger is 6 foot, and so 6 foot is tall, not just for a woman, but even for men. That is very, very tall, even in the United States. And this called to me because I am over 6 feet and I am a woman, and I know exactly what it's like to be tall, and I can't imagine going someplace where the average height is even shorter and therefore your height being more pronounced, which is really the more interesting part of this book to me. However, also travels, a little travelogue in Japan. I figured that would be really, really interesting to read about, so I pulled it off the shelf. And I wound up really, really enjoying it. Obviously, it's written in this cute, drawn style, so there's writing and drawing, so it's kind of like a sketchbook almost of the entire experience. There's maps, there's pictures, some of them are colored, some of them aren't, and she takes some time to talk about the things that she saw in Japan as well as the meaning behind it, which is someone who's not as familiar with everything in Japan, which I'll talk about some of the stuff that I learned in a minute. It was really, really interesting. So at the very beginning, she talks about how she actually went to Japan was because she had gotten involved in this hobby, which became more than a hobby, about dolls. So she got really involved with this company that makes very good, I suppose, dolls in Japan. And she really liked them, and her passion for it led to a job, which led to her wanting to go to Japan. And the company actually reached out and wanted her to meet with them when they were in Japan because she was well known and kind of brought fame of sorts to their company. So she wound up going with 2 of her friends. She talks about visiting shrines, she talks about visiting a hot springs bath. They also spend some time in a shopping district, and they go see some theatrical productions. They obviously go to the doll company as well before returning home. The parts that I found interesting were obviously the parts where she's way too tall for things. For example, the first thing that happens when she arrives in the country is she loses her luggage, and outwardly she's like, oh, it's all fine, no big deal. But inwardly, she's panicking a little bit because she's realizing it's probably going to be very, very hard for her to find clothes for a 6-foot woman. Finding clothes for a woman who's 6 foot or over is already difficult in the United States. Not impossible, but finding pants that fit me is definitely not easy. So I can't imagine what it's like to go to a country where the average height for women is even shorter, and therefore having to find clothes that fit you becomes even harder. The luggage gets found and returned to her, so that stops being a problem. At another place, she has to wear shoes, and she mentions that she wears foot size 11 in the United States, so a US size 11. That is also the shoe size I wear. Very, very difficult to find in the United States. Maybe that's a bit of an exact. You don't have as many options when you're size 11. You have a much more limited supply. Sometimes a store, like whole store chains, won't carry them. You'll have to order them off their website if you want them. And in general, a US size 11 for women's tends to be more difficult to find. Obviously, she was not going to fit in the shoes that the store people were trying to get her, or it was a studio were trying to get her to wear. Wasn't going to work. Additionally, she's obviously standing out in places like trains or just in public, just kind of towering, as you can see in the cover, over the much shorter average population. But she also spends a lot of time just talking about the stuff she's seeing in Japan. It's not all focused on the fact that she is tall. She talks about many of the beautiful things that she sees. She talks about the hot springs, which I've heard of these hot springs before, but the way she describes them makes me really want to go visit them. She talks about the uniquely, well, maybe not uniquely American, but in contrast to other countries, Americans are much more shy when it comes to things like nudity. And in a lot of these hot springs, it's cultural, I guess, to bathe nude. And that is something that obviously can slightly disconcert American tourists, I think, just because our culture tends to be less comfortable with being nude with strangers in a public bath. She also talks about, and this is the part I found most interesting, going to the 2 different shopping districts, and I'm probably going to say their names wrong, so I'm probably not even going to try, but there are 2 shopping districts she went to, and she talks about the street fashion that she saw, and that was probably the most interesting part of the book. I am not familiar with Japanese street fashion, so I've seen pictures before, and it seems very unique. I feel like people get very into their style. They can invest a lot of time and money into these styles, and while it might not be something I would wear or that I even think looks good, I really respect the commitment and the time and the effort and the money and the coordination that these men and women put into their outfits. So she talked about some of the street fashion that she saw, and I think that was the most interesting part of the book from a personal perspective, just because I was able to really go deeper. I was taking my phone and looking up things. I'd put the book down and look up more examples of the street fashion, which I found was really, really interesting. Overall, this got a 4-star from me. Some of the things I liked best in this book included the section on Japanese street fashion. It's something I'm not as familiar with, so I thought it was very, very interesting to read about. And I also really liked the description of the hot springs. I thought the format was really cute. It was like the perfect amount of information on each page. You didn't feel like you were reading a huge block of text, but you felt like you were really getting a cohesive story. So I thought that was really, really good. I really like the art style. I think it's really cute. Here's a picture of her being tall on the train, and I laughed out loud at several different parts of the book. So that was definitely a plus. Things I didn't like so much about the book, that would keep it away from a 5-star. I wish there was maybe just slightly more story. Yeah, maybe more interactions with people. There really isn't much to complain about in this book that I found. There is a lot of positives. Obviously that 5-star is kind of a special category to reach, but other than maybe a tiny bit more story and more interactions that she had along her trip, that would be the only complaints I found with it. I think this is the perfect book for anyone who just kind of wants an easy little travel adventure. It's an easy to read format. Definitely not geared for children, I would say, just because of some of the situations that the author finds herself in. But overall, very, very interesting, and I highly recommend. Again, this is Japan AI by Aimee Major Steinberger. And I guess the author is she's well known. She is, what do they call her? Professional animator and layout artist, and she's worked on some pretty big shows. So if I can find any of her work, I'll be sure to provide a link to it. If anyone else has read this book or has experienced this being tall in a country where being tall is not the norm, which, as I'm sure Aimee Steinberger can confirm, if you're 6 foot, man or woman, you're probably going to be tall for your country, as I can also attest. Please let me know. Otherwise, I really recommend this book, and this is a great way to start off the 2022 reading year. Have a great day, everybody.